Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the FantasyGreek.com Starts and Sits in 30 minutes on 87 Sports Fans Radio. I am one of your illustrious hosts, Keith Grieve, joined by the Fantasy Greek himself, Jim Saranteas. How are you, sir?
Keith, I'm doing great. How in the heck are you this beautiful Saturday night?
Better than Gary Kubiak. I'll just throw that out there. The guy collapses, has a mini stroke, and then lo and behold, 4 or 5 weeks later, he's out of a job. But I can't say that I disagree with the decision. Again, folks, this is fantasy football advice for Week 14, the first week of the playoffs for most leagues. If you are in a league whose championship game is Week 17, your commissioner has no soul. I'll just throw that out there. Anyway, so for most of the football fans that actually have a conscience, this is your first week of the playoffs. Jim and I are going to go through each matchup one by one, but let's start and talk a little bit about Thursday night's train wreck, or if you're a Texans fan, a bona fide tire fire in Houston this year that has led to the canning of Gary Kubiak and Wade Phillips. Yes, that Wade Phillips, promoted to interim head coach. Obviously, I would find it hard to believe he's the long-term solution there. But Jim, your thoughts on the game? I mean, Houston, you look up and down, even with Arian Foster injured, there is a lot of talent on that Texans roster, and I don't understand how this team, even if the defense doesn't live up to last year, how this team doesn't score 40 points a game.
Oh, Keith, you're absolutely right about that. I mean, we've talked about this on the Wednesday night show for 87 Sports Fans several times. This is a team that in the preseason everybody expected they would be one of the teams, let's say the top 6 teams, vying for the Super Bowl. Their defense is the same personnel as from last year. Last year, the defense was suffocating. Their offense was steady. I mean, put the complaints about Matt Schaub to the side, but they had a steady and strong rushing game. Matt Schaub actually showed flashes of just being incredibly good this season, but then he's shown the reverse, which is just being completely awful. And, when it boils right down to it, while I know the last Wednesday show you and I chose the Texans to win, part of the reason was because Ben Tate's great game the week before, where they actually got the ball in the end zone 3 times by rushing it. And this week they couldn't do it once. I mean, that's the problem with with the Texans offense. They cannot score. And until that starts happening, they're going to have a hard time winning football games. And quite frankly, I kind of understand why Wade Phillips is the interim coach, but I'm not sure that he'll survive this offseason because that defense is so bad. And it shouldn't be, because it pretty much is, as we've discussed, the same personnel.
Plenty of blame to go around. It's just an absolute train wreck. I mean, give Gary Kubiak credit, because if you remember where that franchise was when he came on board, he brought them to a state of legitimacy before this season, and now it's just all come apart. And when things like that happen, there really is no other course of action but to look at the head coach and think that maybe it's just time for a different voice leading the charge.
Yeah, and I think it's also not just a different voice, but also ownership sort of looking to the employees, saying, "Look, you guys need to get it together. We're going to make changes that relate to you, and you get to go to other teams, and they get to figure out whether or not you're good enough to be on their team."
And quarterback as well, of course.
Yes.
All right, so let's go through the rest of the games one by one. We'll start off with the Indianapolis Colts at the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals, throughout the season, have had a pretty decent defense. And Indianapolis has been very hit or miss since Reggie Wayne has gone out with a season-ending injury. It's at home. I think the Bengals are a better team than they've played sometimes this year, and I am going to take the Bengals at home.
I'm too, Keith. This is a game. At home, the Bengals are undefeated. They're 3-2 right now in their past 5 games. They could be 5-0, except the 2 losses they had were by 3 points or less. And the Colts, on the road, they're a 3-2 team, and quite frankly, 2 of those wins were by 3 points too. So they could easily be 1-4. The Colts team has just been really erratic, really all over the place, and there's no reason not to think that the Bengals will win this game and keep themselves undefeated at home. Obviously, in fantasy football, you're playing A.J. Green. Excluding the 2 games against the Titans, the Colts have given up an average of 300 slightly better than 300 yards passing per game, slightly better than 2 pass TDs per games to their opponents, and that's 6 in 6 of the last 7 games. So this is a Colts defense that's just struggling right now. When you sort of then start looking at players that are on the fringe, do you play him? Don't you play him? Andrew Luck's a guy that I think it's hard to look at him and say, I'm going to give him the start this week. In the past 3 weeks, he's got 1 touchdown pass. That is just the complete opposite of sort of how he started the season when everyone anointed him as sort of, kind of continuing his great rookie season into his, basically the future Peyton Manning. And he may still be the future Peyton Manning. It's just that it's not working out right now. He's averaging just under 200 yards passing per game. And with that, take T.Y. Hilton, Coby Fleener, they make for shaky starts. I mean, I suppose if you have to play Hilton as a number 3, you could, but a wide receiver 3, you're always saying there's more than one guy you could put in that spot, and you might have a better guy, so you should consider it. Same thing with Coby Fleener. Donald Brown, this is a good week to bench him. He's going to have a good next 2 weeks, but this week just bench him against a defense allowing just a little bit over 100 yards per game and only 4 rushing TDs on the season. Andy Dalton, I think, makes for a decent start, as well as does Gio Bernard. Benjarvis Green-Ellis, while he had a great game last week, there are weeks and weeks of games he did not, so I would try to avoid him in the Bengals. I think you can start him this week.
And you might see what you're seeing now is the effect of a second-year quarterback that doesn't really have a running game, and the receivers are wholly unproven and suspect. So we'll have to see what Indianapolis does going forward from this. But they are still 8-4. You can't take anything away from them, and they're 4-2 on the road. So I like the home team here. Buffalo at Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay has been playing some decent ball lately. And whether or not everyone else agrees that Mike Glennon is the future in Tampa at under center, you at least got to give him another season, another look, because he has done enough to warrant that going forward. The Bills, they're just the Bills. They lose in overtime in the game against the Falcons in Toronto, which was a home road game, and they beat the Jets 37-14. But they lose to teams like the Steelers. They hold their own against the Chiefs. You just don't know what to expect. Going into Tampa, familiar ground, I think Glennon is a better quarterback at this point than E.J. Manuel. That's right, I said it. I'm going to take the Buccaneers at home.
And Keith, I think there's great reason to take the Buccaneers at home. You sort of touched on it that the Bills, if you consider last week's loss in Toronto, which was considered a home game, as a road game, they are 1-5 on the road, which is just ridiculously bad in the NFL. And interestingly, and I thought this was interesting, Mike Glennon, since he's been the starter, the team is 3-2, and I love that stat. So I think the Buccaneers, this is a game that they win and they do a pretty good job in. In terms of fantasy players, obviously C.J. Spiller, Fred Jackson, you start these guys. While the Buccaneers' rush defense has been pretty tough, allowing just 6 TDs on the season to running backs, they're allowing about 140 yards per game in the past 3 games. So this is a great upside game for those guys. Vincent Jackson was a bit of disappointment last week, but 75 yards against a very tough Panthers team. But the Bills, they're allowing about 240 yards passing and 2 TDs on average. So Vincent Jackson, our good man V-Jax, should get back on track real quick. In terms of guys that sort of are on the fringe, E.J. Manuel gets a pretty good matchup here. This is a Bucs D that's given up about 270 and 2 to 3 Ds in 3 of the last 4 games, so he could do something. But in fantasy, you're probably not looking at him simply because there's some risk involved. Even last week when he had a favorable matchup, he had 1 pass TD, and if he didn't have a rush TD, he would have disappointed you with his 210 yards passing. So I would sort of not look at him. Mike Glennon, he's doing a great job. I mean, I think everybody recognizes that. He is the future of this team. He should have a good game here, but again, it's one of these guys you don't have to play this week. It's just not necessary. You should have better options, but if you do have to, you could. The guy I'm really looking to bounce back is a guy we haven't talked about much in the last couple of weeks, and that's Chris Rainey. This kid was just amazing in the last 2 weeks. He's been tough because they've had some tough matchups but the Bills are giving up about 140 yards per game and about one rushing TD per game. And last week against the Falcons, they gave up 3. So what are we talking about here? You make sure you get Chris Rainey into your lineup. He's definitely got some RB2 and certainly flex appeal. And then Timothy Wright, he's a low-end TE play. I would probably avoid him. But if you need him, you got him. And Tequan Underwood, he's a sleeper. And if you're looking at Tequan Underwood, you're desperate.
You mean Bobby Rainey?
Oh, Bobby Rainey. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just looking. I was looking to verify the name before I opened my mouth.
Bobby Chris, one of the Rainies.
Okay.
Whoever it is that's on the Buccaneers, go with that guy.
The Buccaneer Rainey.
There you go.
It's always rainy in Tampa. Oh wait, sorry. It's always sunny in Philly. Sorry, I got that backwards. Speaking of Philly, the Detroit Lions are traveling to the Philadelphia Eagles. When it comes to Philadelphia Eagles home games and picking them, if you listen to 87 Live Wednesday nights at 10 p.m., you like how I snuck that in there?
Yes.
You know that me picking Philly at home has been somewhat of my nemesis. And then they got on a little 2-game home winning streak, and now I'm convinced that they're going to go right back on the schneid at home. Detroit has the better defense. They play decent enough on the road. They're only giving up 83 yards on the ground a game, which is just phenomenal. And I think that is enough with Matthew Stafford. And whether or not they are a one-receiver team, it's Calvin Johnson. That's enough. I'm picking Detroit on the road.
And in this one, Keith, I'm going to take the Eagles. The Lions, they've won 2 of their last 4 games, but here we have the Eagles are on a 4-game winning streak. 2 of those games are at home. And here's the doozy. They've outscored their opponents 114 points to 65 points during that time span. And I just think that this is an Eagles defense, offense and defense, that is just thriving right now. Their defense isn't one that you play in fantasy football because it's just not generating turnovers, it's not generating the kinds of things that make it appealing in that context, but they're still doing a pretty good job. Now, that all having been said, I'm starting Matt Stafford because here's a guy who's thrown 300 yards passing per game and close to 3 TDs. You're starting Calvin Johnson. He's obviously a must start. When it comes to running backs, you're definitely starting Reggie Bush against a defense giving up about 115 yards in general, miscellaneous yards, TD to the position. But what makes Reggie Bush so appealing this week, and even Joique Bell is sort of a flex option, is in 2 of the past 4 games, this is a defense that's given up 401 rush yards combined. So you can feel really good about that. For the Eagles, if you exclude the Packers, the Lions are giving up close to 300 yards passing and close to 3 passing TDs per game. I love Nick Foles this week. In fact, I think he is the number 1 start amongst all quarterbacks in fantasy football. So if you got him, you better be playing him. LaShawn McCoy, he's got a rough go. You pointed out how good this rush defense is, but the reality is because LaShawn McCoy is so active in the passing game, you get him on the gridiron, he should be involved, he should be able to overcome this very tough rush defense and do something fantasy-wise. And with everything said, start Deshaun Jackson. He's a top 5 start. And obviously I love Riley Cooper in this setup. He should get his usual 4 catches for 100 yards and hopefully a score. And other than that, I'm taking the Eagles.
All right. The Oakland Raiders travel to the New York Jets. You want to talk about a team who you have no idea what you're going to get from week to week? That's the New York Jets. And this team, it was so bad to the point where quarterback of the future, Geno Smith, was benched for a little bit last week, trying to find a spark, as Rex Ryan found it. Well, if you don't have a spark from your first-year player, I think the worst thing you could do from a confidence standpoint is to bench him. But Oakland, on the other hand, comes in, and even though they are a paltry 1-5 on the road, I think that their defense is enough, and the Jets are that much of an enigma offensively now where they have no idea what they're doing. And I am picking the Oakland Raiders to go into the new stadium. I forget what the hell it's called. In New Jersey, and come out victorious. MetLife Stadium, that's what it is.
Well, it's new and it's in New Jersey. That's all we need to know. Yeah, the Jets, for all the Skybox members out there that I write for every week, these nice, 3 to 5 paragraph detailed game analysis with player names and who to play, not to play, who are these people sort of on the cusp. It is just crazy how bad the offense is. I mean, this is an offense that's scoring an average of almost 16 points per game, which is just terrible. They're giving up sacks, tossing interceptions. They lead the league in turnovers. I mean, it's all just bad. And, so if the Raiders defense is a must start in my mind this week. And I'm taking the Raiders because of this. Under Matt McGloin, this is crazy. Before he started, the Raiders were scoring just about 20 points to 25 points by their opponents. Under McGloin, that's changed, and now suddenly the Raiders are outscoring their opponents about 27 to just about 26. I know it's just 1 point, but just the change is just phenomenal. So, McGloin's doing the kinds of things that this team needs to make them a better team, and I see them winning this game. I've already mentioned the Raiders. You start them. After that, I think things are a little bit more up for grab. I think McGloin could have a good game here because the Jets' rush defense is so good he should be passing often. But again, why would you play him? It's the playoffs. You shouldn't be depending on him. And if you are, that's okay. It's just that I don't anticipate too many people doing that. This is a tough start for Rashard Jennings against the number one rush defense, giving up only 77 yards per game. He would have to be really involved in the passing game and get a score to be a worthwhile play. You should try to look elsewhere. Rod Streeter, I think, makes for a nice wide receiver 3 given the matchup. He's got 80 yards receiving in 2 of the last 3 games, including a score. So he's definitely got some chemistry with Matt McGloin. For the Jets, Chris Ivory, he's the only one worth playing. The Raiders are giving up about 130 rush yards per game in the last few games, and they can give up a score. So if you have him, you can get him in as an RB2 or a flex play. Andre Holmes is the sleeper in this game, but again, if you're in the fantasy playoffs, I hope you're not looking at sleepers. I hope you're sticking with your lineup, and that's how you're going to win this week. But I'm going to take the Raiders on the road.
All right, and the Atlanta Falcons travel to the Green Bay Packers. Matt Flynn made his return to the Packers lineup last week, and from what I saw, he was absolutely atrocious. There is no team that has wanted their starting quarterback to come back more than the Green Bay Packers. And even though the Atlanta Falcons have had a rough year, decimated by injuries, they looked awfully good, even though they did let Buffalo take them to overtime. They did put up 34 points. The offense seemed like it was coming back. And with Matt Flynn under center for the Packers, I'm picking the Falcons on the road.
Yeah, I am too. And, it's really just amazing to see how the Packers have fallen apart since Aaron Rodgers has been gone. I mean, this is a defense that's giving up 26 to 40. And I know he's the quarterback. He's not on the defense, but this all lines up with his injury. I mean, the defense has given up 26 to 40 points per game over the past 6 games, and that's just ridiculously bad. On the flip side, you got the Falcons, who in their last 3 games have scored over 28 points per game. I see the same thing continuing here. What makes the game interesting from my perspective is this is a bad Falcons defense too. I mean, they're giving up oodles and oodles of yards, and they're basically not pressuring the quarterback. They only have 22 sacks on the season, which I want to say is the league worst. But in terms of fantasy, here's where we're at. You're starting Roddy White, who broke out last week for 143 yards. This is a Packers defense that's given up over 250 passing yards in 3 of the last 5 games and 2 to 3 TDs in those 3 games. You're starting Harry Douglas. You're starting Tony Gonzalez. For the Packers, you better get Eddie Lacy active against the Falcons' rush defense, giving up about 150 all-purpose yards and a TD to the position. Now, where it gets a little bit hazy is Matt Ryan. I could see why nobody trusts him. In many leagues, he's on waivers, but I think this is a good game for him. I think he gets 250 plus as well as 2 TDs. You're likely not going to start him, but let's see what happens. He needs to bounce back here. This is a game for Steven Jackson. I love him as an RB2 in this game. I mean, he's been playing well. His catches are increasing. His production is increasing in terms of yardage, and his touchdowns from 0 to 1 to 2 in the past 3 games. This is a Packers rush defense that is just struggling, and I think we're going to see a ton of Steven Jackson. He should have another great game, so you start him as an RB2. After that, Jarrett Boykin, Jordy Nelson, James Jones. We know that the Falcons' pass defense isn't very good, but, boy, can you trust these guys? I mean, at best, they're a wide receiver 3, and my preference is not to play them this week if you can. So if you're out there, be very cautious. Falcons win.
All right, and the Cleveland Browns go to the New England Patriots. And if at the beginning of the year, I thought the Browns were a 500 team, and then injuries to the quarterbacks, and Brandon Weeden turned into Braden Weeden, and Brian Hoyer comes in and does a nice job, and there's hope, and then he's gone for the year, and then Jason Campbell comes in and does a surprisingly good job, efficient job, and now there's injury questions with him as well. And the defense, I think, is talented, but they're on the field entirely too long. It's not going to make a damn bit of difference what Cleveland does. New England is still New England, and even though they may not be your father's Patriots, they're good enough to beat the Browns at home, and I'm taking the Patriots.
I am too. And, when you look at behind the numbers, you see the Patriots are undefeated at home at 6-0, and this is a team that at home is scoring 36.5 points per game. Where the Browns on the road, they're just slightly better than 20. I mean, it shouldn't even be a close game. In terms of fantasy, it gets a little bit more interesting, obviously. Josh Gordon, what an amazing kid. You're starting this guy. He's got 600 yards receiving and 4 TDs in the past 3 games. That is incredible. He's heavily targeted in this offense, and it doesn't matter who's the quarterback. He is a must-start. You're starting Tom Brady. You're starting Rob Gronkowski. Brady's averaging 360 yards per game and 2.5 TDs over the past 4 games. That's ridiculous. And the guy I like that, I know I've talked about the receiving group for the Patriots sort of being a mess, and I still don't disagree with that earlier statement, but I think you're almost compelled to play Julian Edelman because he's now being heavily targeted in the offense. He's been one of Tom Brady's favorite receivers in the past 2 weeks with 211 yards receiving and 2 TDs. And in the Patriots defense, you got to start them too. This is a Browns team that's struggling. Look at the injuries up on the offensive line and the defensive side of the ball, and you can understand why. But Browns are giving up a defensive score, 8 sacks, 7 turnovers, and just 39 points in 2 games. So that's not very good. The running back situation for the Patriots, everybody keeps asking me about this, and it just drives me crazy. I want to avoid it because I just never know what we're going to get. The best person there is clearly Shane Vereen. He's so far averaging 15 to 18 touches over the past couple of games. He's going to get you, though, about 80-some all-purpose yards, which, quite frankly, is not very good for an RB2 unless he scores, which he did once in the past 2 games. So if you're desperate, he's an RB2 guy that you can plug in if you have to. He's better as a flex play. And that's how I would handle that situation. And I would avoid everybody else. I would avoid Danny Amendola, Camberell Tompkins. If Stephen Ridley touches the field, I would avoid him and just move on with it. Patriots win.
All right, the Minnesota Vikings go to the Baltimore Ravens. The Vikings coming off that horrific win. Yes, can a win be horrific? Yes, when you win the way the Vikings did, when the Bears did everything in their possible way to hand the game to them. There is no possible way the Vikings should be walking out of their home stadium victorious after that. But they are, and they are feeling good. Adrian Peterson is having a phenomenal year, averaging over 4.5 yards per carry. The Ravens are 5-1 at home, and I still think they are a better team than the Minnesota Vikings. You know why? Do you know what makes me think that the Baltimore Ravens are better than the Minnesota Vikings? Oxygen. Baltimore will win this game.
Keith, I love you for that. I got to tell you, this should hands down be a lopsided game. I mean, you could look behind the numbers, and it's crazy. I don't even know why the Bears lost. Vikings are giving up 30.5 points per game. That is stupid bad. And then the Ravens, on the other hand, they're allowing under 20. So how do you not beat the Vikings? I mean, they've only allowed 2 rushing TDs, which is interesting. I mean, you have Adrian Peterson, you're starting him, but this could actually be a pretty rough go for him. If he gets up 150 all-purpose yards and 2 TDs, you count yourself lucky because this Ravens defense, they're tough and they hit hard, as everybody knows from last week with Le'Veon Bell getting concussed. Otherwise, in the passing game, that's where the Ravens struggle. And still, I can't look around and recommend anybody from the Vikings. Christian Ponder, Matt Castle, Greg Jennings. I'd avoid them all because it is so flippin' risky. Now, on the flip side, For the Ravens, Joe Flacco makes for a good start here if you need some help. I mean, this defense is struggling. They're giving up about 280 yards passing and 2 or more TDs per game. You are absolutely 100% starting Ray Rice this week, everybody, and here's why. When he's faced defenses that are running back friendly, and I'm talking like the Broncos, the Dolphins, and for us Bears fans, the Bears, Rice has produced, and dig this, 321 all-purpose yards and 4 TDs. He is a must-start this week. You get him on the gridiron. You start Torrey Smith. He scored a touchdown and is averaging about 60 yards per game, last few games here. But the Vikings defense, 287 yards passing and 2 TDs per game. Amazing. This guy should get up over 100 and a score. The Ravens defense, you start them. I mean, they're just phenomenally good, and this Vikings, they're phenomenally bad. So Dennis Pitta is the last guy I want to talk about briefly. If he's available, pick him up, get him on your bench. He could do something this week. The only reason I'm not trusting him right this second, I don't know how healthy he is. I don't know if his snaps are going to be limited. I'm expecting them to be limited, and it's the fantasy playoffs. But next week, he could be a full go.
Alrighty, the Kansas City Chiefs travel to the Washington Redskins. The Redskins having a horrific year. Is it RG3? Is it not RG3? Is it coming off the injury? Is it because of the way he plays? It doesn't matter when your defense gives up 30 points a game. The only good thing for Washington in this is that Kansas City doesn't exactly light the scoreboard up either, but they are averaging almost 25 points a game. You look at Kansas City's last 3 losses. They've given up 35, 41, and 27 points, and that was to Denver twice and San Diego once. Two pretty good offenses. Before that, they were giving up 13, 17, 16, 7. This is a good defense when there's a mediocre offense on the other side of the ball, and that is what Washington is right now. I'm picking the Kansas City Chiefs on the road.
And Keith, I am too, and you want to know how many points the Chiefs are giving up on average before these last 3 games, which were against the Broncos and the Chargers? Do you want to know?
Hit me.
12.3 points per game. That is amazing. I mean, that's how good this defense is. I couldn't even believe people were talking about, maybe we shouldn't play the Chiefs defense. I'm like, what are you, crazy? I mean, especially against a Redskins team that is, we've seen it on TV, they're just struggling. They're not doing very well. They're getting to RG3, and I think you have to start these guys in a week where, quite frankly, there are, after about 6 or 7 defenses, there aren't that many good ones. I mean, I've got less defenses that I'm recommending to start than there are games. That's how bad of a week it is. So you're playing these guys against them. I actually, you play Jamal Charles. That's a usual, start. I mean, don't avoid that. Then when it comes to everybody else, it's sort of, you got to decide for yourself. Alex Smith could be a good start this week, but I always worry that you've got a Chiefs team that they're willing to do just whatever it takes to win the game. And if whatever it takes to win the game is to run Jamal Charles 35 times, that's what they're going to do. And if Alex Smith doesn't throw anything, they don't care. And that's the reason why I would be concerned. Same thing with Dwayne Bowe. I mean, you could play him as a wide receiver 3, but if you look at his last 3 games, in 2 of them he had TDs. Otherwise, he had his best game, 57 yards. So if he didn't get you a score, you would have been disappointed. So I would try to avoid him if I could. Robert Griffin III, regardless of the matchup, I don't think he's that bad of a play, but he's just a low-end QB1 this week. The thing with the Chiefs is this, that besides the Chargers and the Broncos, they have played offenses that have been punching bags. And at the end of the day, the Redskins have played, they're a better offense than what we're seeing, so we could see something from the guy. If you have Robert Griffin III, I'd be very concerned as to who your backup is. If you do have a great backup, let's say, for example, Ryan Fitzpatrick, I might consider that because he's in a great matchup. So, it just really depends. Or if you picked up Josh McCown, I definitely would play him. But other than that, Chiefs win.
All right, Miami at Pittsburgh. The Miami Dolphins are the consummate 500 team. They're 6-6. They score 21 points a game. They give up 21 points a game. They're 3-3 at home. They're 3-3 on the road. And then they face Pittsburgh, who started the year absolutely atrocious. Freaking atrocious. That's the only way to say it. But then they go and they reel off 3 straight wins, beating Buffalo, the Lions. They go to Cleveland and win. And then they come up 2 points short at Buffalo on Thanksgiving Day. You want to. It's not the kind of performances that make you want to scream that they've found their mojo back or anything like that. But Miami is not at that point where they can stroll into Pittsburgh and win this game. I'm picking the Steelers.
Yeah, the problem with the Dolphins is on the road they're not a good scoring team. They scored between 17 to 24 points, where on the flip side the Steelers are 23 to 37 points at home. It could be a close game. I think it will be a close game only because these defenses are so good against the pass that I think it'll be a run-heavy game, which is why I'm strongly recommending Le'Veon Bell. Dolphins are giving up about 120 yards in a score to opposing running backs per game, but I could see Bell doing much better than that because of the exact reason that I pointed out. Lamar Miller makes for a decent start this week. He's seen a boost in his touches with Daniel Thomas out for the season. And, the Steelers is the one thing they're not very good at anymore, and that's the rush. About 115 yards per game and a TD per game. So I like Daniel Thomas as a low-end RB2 or a flex play. I'm only downgrading him because he's just, not been the greatest player this season, but this is a game he might actually do some pretty damn good. I would avoid Mike Wallace and Charles Clay. This is just the Steelers' defensive unit's only given up about 100 yards per game, or 150 yards per game passing, and generally one pass TD per game. So avoid those guys. Avoid Ryan Tannehill. I would also sort of avoid the Steelers' playmakers like Ben Roethlisberger and his wide receivers. I mean, this is a Dolphins team that's 165 yards per game in a passing TD. That's pretty good. So, you want to bench these guys this week if you can. Antonio Brown at best, if you have to play him, look at him as a wide receiver 3. Sleeper for me in this game, and not more than a sleeper, is Heath Miller. For some reason, the Dolphins just don't defend the tight ends, and he could easily put up 100 yards or even 40 yards in a TD, but something like that. Otherwise, take the Steelers at home.
All right, Tennessee Titans at 5-7 go to Denver. The 10-2 Broncos. This isn't even worth breaking down. All right, the Denver Broncos are averaging 459 yards of offense. Tennessee has a pretty decent defense. They're still averaging the 327 yards allowed. It's Peyton freaking Manning. All right, and as much as Tennessee's defense might keep it close early, that offense is not going to hold the ball enough. It's not going to score enough points to keep Denver's offense off the field. And any time that Peyton Manning is on the field, it's a disadvantage to whoever he is playing. This is an easy pick for me. Denver at home.
Yeah, I don't even want to talk about it. This is the number one. This is the number one offense in the league, and they're clearly going to beat the Titans, even though the Titans have a great pass defense. I just don't know how they could stop this offense based on what we've seen so far this season. In terms of people to play, you're playing Chris Johnson, guys. Check this out. The Broncos are giving up an average of 135 yards per game to the running back position in the past 4 games. And add to that some miscellaneous receiving yards, and add to that 4 TDs. That's pretty good. So if you have Chris Johnson, you start him this week. Same thing with Delaney Walker. He's concussed, so double check, make sure he's active. He's deemed active for Sunday. But, 40 yards and a TD to the position is what the Broncos are giving up, so I love this matchup for him. For the Broncos, you know who to start. Peyton Manning, Nosha Marino, all the wide receivers, Julius Thomas. This is just the way to go. I will tell you for the Broncos, Monty Ball is not a bad flex play, and the reason is this. While the Titans have one of the absolute best pass defenses, when it comes to the rush defense, they're giving up 6 rushing touchdowns on the season. That means they're giving up for sure 1, slightly better than 1, and that has Monty Ball written all over him. If you have Ryan Fitzpatrick this week, whoever your other quarterback better have a really good matchup because this is a great matchup for him. The Broncos are giving up over 290 yards passing per game in 2 of the last 3 games. And they're giving up about 2 TDs per game, too. Ryan Fitzpatrick has done this before. I know he's had some bad games, but he's had some really good ones. And you could just sense they're going to be coming from behind, and he's going to have to throw the ball. Same thing, Kendall Wright, Nate Washington. I like both of those guys in fantasy for sure as wide receiver 3s. If you need a defense this week, the Broncos defense is one to consider. It's not the greatest of matchups, but like I said, it's very sparse for getting defenses. This is just one that you can get in, and you hope maybe they get a special teams play for a TD. But yeah, Broncos hands down.
The Seattle Seahawks travel to San Francisco in a game that is one of the two really marquee matchups this week. The Seahawks at 11-1 just got done putting a spanking on the New Orleans Saints on Monday Night Football. But now they travel to a division rival. Yes, the defending NFC champs, but the 49ers have not really played that kind of dominating football. The first time these teams met on September 15th, Seattle just smacked them around 29-3. That was in Seattle, of course. When I try to pick these interdivision games, usually you throw records out the window. For years, the Bears would get destroyed by Green Bay, and then when Lovie Smith came around, all of a sudden they weren't the better team, but they somehow managed to get in there and win and split the season series. That's kind of the mentality I have when I look at this. San Francisco being the home team does make a difference. Seattle at home is a tremendous advantage. It really is a coin flip, and in these games, even though Seattle is playing probably the better ball, I mean, they are only averaging 177 passing yards allowed per game. That's just ridiculous. And Colin Kaepernick hasn't really looked like Colin Kaepernick of last year, which is only natural. It's his second year. But I'm picking the 49ers to win this game at home.
I'm going to take the Seahawks on the road. I like what we saw last week against the Saints, and I think they're just building every game from one game to the next, and what we're seeing is better and better every week. They've got the number 2 offense, the number 2 defense. The 49ers have the number 10 offense, the number 3 defense. And, you just kind of look at their history, recent history, meaning the earlier game in week 2 and last season, and there's some things that immediately jump out at you. First off, with the exception of the Texans, this is a weird observation, no team has passed for more than 210 yards against the Seahawks. I think that is an amazing statistic. And when you look at the 49ers, 4 teams have gone for over 290 against them. And I think that's an amazing statistic. And I think what it suggests is that the Seahawks definitely have hope in their passing game, which doesn't, Russell Wilson, he's definitely not a must start, but he's a guy that he's an option. It's just you obviously know that there's sort of this downside that potentially could happen. But he's a guy that's got multiple TDs in 8 of 12 games, so I think that's pretty compelling. Same thing with Doug Baldwin. That's pretty compelling as a wide receiver 3. The guys that you sort of want to look at and say, let's play ball, Marshawn Lynch. He has this team's number. I don't care what anybody says. You start him this week. He should be in line for a big game. Frank Gore really didn't have a good game in week 2. I think he had 30 all-purpose yards if he was lucky. And but here's the thing. Last season in San Francisco, he blew it up for 182 all-purpose yards. So I think you have to play Gore this week because that's what we should see. We should see a run-strong game coming from the 49ers because this pass defense is just too damn good. You can't avoid it. And I'm benching guys like Colin Kaepernick. I'm not touching Anquan Bowl. I'm not touching Michael Crabtree. I know a lot of people are talking about him, but you know what? You bench these guys. Their secondary is playing just as good with missing personnel as it is with the personnel that they wish that they probably had on the field. And the last guy, Vernon Davis, I got to tell you, this is not a good matchup for him. He had 20 yards in week 2, and last season in 2 games, 27 receiving yards. I would try to avoid him if I could. I would start the 49ers defense because, like I said, it's a light week for defenses, and I think you have to play him if you got him.
The St. Louis Rams travel to the Arizona Cardinals. They met on September 8th of this year with St. Louis edging out the Cardinals 27-24. This game in Arizona, both teams play really better defense than you would expect. A little under the radar, these two defenses are. Has anybody noticed that the Rams have not really missed that much offensively since Sam Bradford got injured? I mean, honestly, let's ask yourself that question. Maybe not tonight, but ask yourself that question sometime. Looking at these two teams, neither one of them really runs the ball exceptionally well. St. Louis is averaging 114 yards a game, but Arizona is only averaging 89 yards a game on the ground. They only give up 83, but they're only gaining 89. That being said, again, even matchups like this, I'll always go with the home team. I'm picking the Cardinals.
Yeah, I'm taking the Cardinals at home. At home, this is a team that they're scoring 27 points per game. They've been dominant both defensively and offensively. And the Rams on the road, there's only two times that they've outscored the Cardinals. And in both those games, it was 38 points and it was against the Texans and the Colts. So, you can't really, I don't know, the way those two defenses have played, I don't think that 38 points is rightly impressive. So let's look at the other four games. And if you look at the other four games, the Rams are averaging just 15 points per game. So I just don't see how they overcome that. In terms of people in fantasy, obviously Jared Cook, you're starting for the Rams against just the absolute worst defense against tight ends. I mean, it's unexplainable. Every week they're giving up TDs to the position and yardage to the position. So Jared Cook, and he actually started in week one when he had about 140 yards and 2 TDs against him. For the Cardinals, I love Larry Fitzgerald. I absolutely love Michael Floyd against a Rams defense that's, 250 pass yards and 1 to 2 TDs per game.
How many loves was that?
What's that?
How many loves was that? That was an awful lot of loves.
Oh, that was a lot of them. Yeah. Anyway, and then the Cardinals defense, you start these guys at home. These guys are just crazy good. They're only giving up about 18 points per game, and then they've got like 19 sacks, 13 turns. I mean, it's nuts. You start them too. Zach Stacy, I want to talk about this guy because I really love this kid. I think he's a guy that'll be in the conversation as to whether or not he's a first-round draft pick next year in fantasy. But this week, you need to treat him like a lower-end RB2 or a flex play. The Cardinals are the number 4 rush defense at 83.2 yards per game, and that's pretty much what Zach does. He runs the ball. But where it really becomes difficult for him is this. They've only given up 4 TDs on the season. So even if Zach gets 100 yards, which actually may not be bad. I mean, can't say that that's bad for an RB2. But boy, if he doesn't get a touchdown, that could really crush you. So just keep your expectations in check. Carson Palmer, one of the hottest quarterbacks that we've seen recently, going up against a Rams team, giving up over 300 yards passing. But here's the thing. They're stingy in the red zone. It's only 1 to 2 TDs on average. And, when I say 1 to 2, that means he may not get 2. So this is a week, if you can, it's risky. Try to avoid him. Same thing with Rashard Mendenhall. I mean, he's been on a roll, but he's on a roll because he's scoring. They give up about the Rams do give up about a rushing TD a game. So you could look at him as a low-end RB2 or a flex play. He's a guy that gets me nervous, and I'd only be recommending him if your third choice or your next choice is really that bad. Otherwise, taking the Cardinals at home.
The New York Giants travel to San Diego, and Eli Manning faces the quarterback that he was traded in place of. How does that work? It was a giant mess. It kind of kicked off the whole, anti-Eli sentiment because he came off like a prima donna in that whole scenario. But anyway, focusing on this matchup right now, both teams 5-7, and I still can't figure out how the Giants are 5-7 after the way they started. Not just because they were losing, but they were losing so abysmally. And they won last week against the Redskins. They lost by a field goal to the Cowboys the week before, but they beat Green Bay, they beat Oakland. But then, they lose 15-7 to Philly the week before that at Philly. San Diego, when they're on their offense, their offense is on. They're averaging 402 yards per game, 292 of those through the air. This is just a better offensive team than whatever the Giants' defense can throw at them. And they're at home, and I'm going to take the Chargers.
Keith, and I think you hit it right on the head. And, it's absolutely true. The Chargers are a better offense. And with the exception of the Eagles, the Giants are not very good against good offenses. They've lost to the Cowboys, the Broncos, the Panthers, the Bears, and the Chiefs. And that to me, it speaks volumes as to why the Chargers will win this week. In fantasy, Andre Brown, love the guy. It's a shame that he missed so much of the year. He's just been pretty special and could have been more special if he sort of got to work his way into the season and sort of become the power running back that this team desperately needed, that without, I think, has caused problems for their running game. He's going up against a defense giving up close to 120 rush yards per game and close to 1 TD per game. So I like him this week. Is definitely an RB2. I love Phillip Rivers as a low-end QB1. This pass defense for the Giants, it's been stingy. But again, not so good against the better defense. Even Tony Romo lit him up for a couple TDs, and that's impressive for a guy that's sort of been on again, off again all season long. Keenan Allen, loved him as a wide receiver 2 or 3, and that really depends on how deep your roster is, because he's been a go-to guy for Phillip Rivers, and I think at this point you just can't bench him if you can avoid it. It's really tough to look at Eli Manning, Victor Cruz, Ruben Randall, Brandon Myers, Hakeem Nicks, and kind of say, it's tough to play these guys these days, especially against a Chargers team, which can give up between 240 and 300 yards passing easily, and multiple touchdowns. But Eli Manning's been bad. And, if you have Victor Cruz or Ruben Randall, at best, they're low-end starting options like a WR3. And Ruben Randall, he's been struggling lately. Brandon Myers, he scored last week, and suddenly everybody wants Brandon Myers, everybody wants to play him. And the problem with Brandon Myers, outside of that score, I don't think he's scored since week 1 or 2, and his yardage has been absolutely awful, like 40, 50 yards, nothing better. So don't jump on that bandwagon. Avoid Brandon Myers, okay? He is nothing more than a bench guy. One guy I like that presents a little bit of risk, but I love his upside, and I think he'll be productive this week, is Ladarius Green. As everybody's heard, he almost played every snap last week. The Chargers are basically rolling out 2 tight end sets with him and Antonio Gates, and Ladarius Green is more productive than Antonio Gates in yardage and touchdowns on lesser receptions, and that's absolutely impressive. So Ladarius Green's the guy that I want to play, but if I had a second choice, it would definitely be Antonio Gates, because he's still heavily targeted and he's still productive. It's just I wish he could get into the end zone. So if you're playing him, he's a low-end option, but Ladarius Green is a guy that I like, and I think he can pick up a play this week. Ryan Matthews, he's a decent enough flex play against the defense, allowing just over 100 yards rushing per week. And Danny Woodhead, I'd avoid him because he actually has been struggling. A lot of people are still high on him, and he's just not a guy to play in fantasy this week. Chargers at home. Let's win, Chargers. Bolt up.
All right, we got two more games to go, and then we have actually a tweet with a lineup question that we just received.
All right.
So let's finish up these 2 games, then we'll get to the tweets. The Twitter handle is @87sportsfans, folks. Send in your lineup questions, and we'll get to them right after. So the next game up is the second really marquee matchup: the Carolina Panthers traveling to the New Orleans Saints. And really the first thing that jumps out to me that's really shocking about this matchup is that this is the first time that these 2 teams have met all year. I don't know what kind of scheduling fiasco comes up with the fact that these 2 teams don't face each other for the first time until week 14. But the good news is we get them again in week 16. Last year, the 2 times these teams faced off, the Panthers won by 8, and the second time, the Panthers won again by 6. This game, both teams are 9-3. The Saints just came off that big smackdown by the Seattle Seahawks. They're at home. They're a much different team at home. But Carolina, this is a game that if Carolina wants to be taken seriously, they have to win this game. They have to. But I don't think they will, because the Saints are just that good on offense at home. I'm picking the Saints at home.
I am too, and Keith, I'll throw out to you, give some girth to some of your observations, and that's this. Against, the Panthers, here's the best 2 offenses they've played the entire season, and that's the Patriots and then the Cardinals. And against those 2 teams, they gave up 22 and 20 points. And I think that's the kind of give up in points that they could easily give up to the Saints playing in the Superdome in New Orleans, where the Saints, they're averaging 33 points per game. That's crazy. With 23 on the low side and 49 on the high side. So, it's hard for me to see this defense stop this offense. And quite frankly, after last week, the spanking that the Saints got at the hands of the Seahawks, I think this is a game that they're like, we're going to go win this, and we're going to win this as strongly as we can. I do think it'll be a close game. It'll probably be 20-23 or something like that, but I like the Saints too at home. In fantasy, I think you got to start Cam Newton. He's been so solid, just so solid. In 3 of the past 4 games, he has not thrown for less than 175 yards, which sounds low, but that's actually for a guy like him that rushes as much as he does. That's good, and he's been scoring multiple touchdowns. So you have to play him. You have to play Greg Olson. He's scored a TD in 4 of the last 6 games. He's a regular red zone target. At this point in the season, he is a must-start. Drew Brees, Jimmy Graham, must-starts this week. And I say that because in half their games, the Panthers, while they've held their opponents to under 2, here's an interesting stat. In half the games that they've held opponents to under 260 yards, the average is about 143. So you're looking at that going, oh, that's awful. But in the other half, where opponents were able to throw for over 250 yards, the average was 275. That's a great number for Drew Brees. You can see him throwing for that, and you can see him for multiple TDs, which is why I like this game for him. I like Jimmy Graham. I think you can look at Marcus Colston and start him as a wide receiver 3. Both the Panthers and the Saints defenses are startable. Again, it's a tough week for defenses with the exception of half a dozen, so you could look at these two and start them. I will say avoid the running backs for the Saints, Darren Sproles, Pierre Thomas. Only 3 teams have rushed for over 100 yards against the Panthers, and it's the Bills, 49ers, and Patriots. And I just don't see Sproles and Thomas sort of hooking up and doing that together. So I'm gonna take the Saints. I think they can muster out the win in this one.
All right, and the last game on the docket is the Dallas Cowboys traveling to the Chicago Bears. The Bears, who have just been decimated by injuries on defense, they're without Jay Cutler, but they really haven't missed a beat on offense without Cutler because Josh McCown has come in and played admirably. But on defense, they're very thin at the D tackle. They're still without Lance Briggs. They have no middle linebacker. Their safeties are atrocious. The Cowboys are too potent on offense, and quite frankly, there's nothing that the Bears can do to stop them. This may end up being a shootout, a high-scoring game, but I don't think that the Bears will have enough to stop them. The only thing that's good that's going to happen to the Bears on this night is the retirement of Mike Ditka's number. I'm picking the Cowboys to win on the road.
Oh, I totally forgot that was happening Monday. That's awesome. Good for the coach. He's such a good guy, and he's done some great things, and he's pretty hilarious when you see him on our friends over there at ESPN. Let's put it that way. I'm going to take the Bears, and we talked about this. I think this will be a high-scoring game. I could go either way. It's a game that my least confidence is to the winner. But I will say this: the Cowboys, they've struggled on the road. They're 2-4. McCown, on the other hand, in 4 starts, they've won both the home games by a combined 50 to 40 points, and I just think that is a phenomenal stat. Where Tony Romo, as I mentioned, he's sort of been on again, off again. You look at his stats, he's got a game with no TDs, then 1 TD, then 2 TDs, then 3, then 2, then 1, and it's a little bit all over the place. And part of the reason is because they're doing they've had games where that's all it took, or they've done great in their running games. And in terms of the running games, you're starting DeMarco Murray against a Bears team that is absolutely awful, that is giving up an average of 154 yards rushing per game as well as a touchdown per game to the position. You're starting Matt Forte. There's some combination of 125 yards and to 150 all-purpose yards and a TD that the Cowboys are giving up to the position. You start him. You start Des Bryant, Jason Witten. In fact, the Bears against the tight end position, they've given up touchdowns in 2 of the last 4 games to tight end. So you have to like the opportunity that Witten has to have a great game this week. For the Bears, you're starting Josh McCown. This is 295 to 320 yards is what he could put up. He could put up 2 to 3 TDs. Brandon Marshall, you're starting him. Alshon Jeffrey, you're starting him. Martellus Bennett, you're starting him. And that's it. I have nobody that is sort of a question mark. These are the people you start in this game. I'm taking the Bears because I think it'll be tit for tat. They're trading scores, field goals, touchdowns, back and forth. And I'm just picking the Bears because I think at the end of the game, Robbie Gould will come through for us and make up for everything that happened last week. Bears win.
All right, that's the last game we have, and we have one tweet with a lineup question: Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis, or Andre Ellington. Who would you take? Who would you start?
Under the circumstances, I would rather take Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis. Andre Ellington has simply disappeared from the stat column. In fact, I think he's a little bit nicked up, which is part of the reason. As I mentioned earlier, I don't like Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis necessarily this week. But I would give him the go in the matchup. And, Marv Lewis is one of these guys that when you look at that team, they're very much a traditional team. They're very much into doing things the old-fashioned way, developing their own talent and not paying for big free agents. But then what I think they like to do is look at veterans and go with their veterans in big games. And that's why he has some upside. It's just that in the fantasy playoffs, if I had other options than Ben Jarvis, I would take him. But if you're saying Andre Ellington or Ben Jarvis, I would have to take Ben Jarvis.
All right, there you have it, folks. Fantasy advice that you can use. Well, let's see. That'll do it, folks, for Week 14. Best of luck in your Round 1 playoffs. Hopefully you'll have a reason to listen next week. For Jim Saranteas, from thefantasygreek.com, follow him on Twitter at @thefantasygreek. And if you're a serious fantasy football player, folks, the Skybox membership is worth every penny. That's thefantasygreek.com. For Jim Saranteas, I'm Keith Grieve. You've been listening to Starts and Sits in 30 Minutes on 87 Sports Fans Radio. Have a good night, everybody.